Okay,
I'm here. Thank you.
and so Preston, first thing is you take the roll.
Commissioner Emelson. Commissioner Liss. Here. Commissioner Monk.
Here.
Commissioner Nelson.
Here. Nelson or Emilton?
You were first, but we got you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Here. Mayor Clark.
Here.
And Chairperson Canberra.
Here.
And the time's 5:32.
Okay, the first item, public hearing is application for a temporary use permit. Location is Phillips re-subdivision block 34, lots A through B. Address to be determined Clinton Street, zone historic business HB. Applicant Carl Thies, property owner Jenny Lee Phillips, revocable funded living trust.
All right, well, excellent. Oh, now I need to get you guys pinned back up there. Sorry, there we go. Well, good evening. So as you mentioned, Chair, first off, it's kind of weird. I hope you guys can see me okay and hear me okay. So if you need me to say anything differently, please let me know. So yeah, what we have first on the agenda is a temporary use permit for a temporary staging area. Located over at 540 Clinton Street. And oh, where the heck did my note go? There it is. The building was damaged due to a fire, I believe, a little bit ago, and has been restored or is in the process of being renovated and restored. And so this request is in coordination with that effort. Most of the original process so far for renovation has been done and accessed from the same property, same parcel, but the latter components of it, this next phase is needed to, they need to access the building from adjacent properties. So lots C, A and B. And then in addition, they're going to need to use this area to stage the renovation and the reconstruction components. So therefore, we're looking for the applicant is requesting a temporary use permit to allow construction staging on the property. The location, as you mentioned, is zoned HB. Different than other and previous requests, this is there's no need to cross rights of way or roads. It's directly adjacent to the property, all private property. Let's see here. A site plan was provided to identify the general layout of the staging area, and the applicant anticipates storing materials and equipment on this parcel for the external construction and to accept deliveries. Parking for the construction workers is going to be to the south of the building on lots C and D. Access to the property or the staging area will be obtained through Chorus Street to the west. The applicant will construct and install a ramp over the curb to prevent damage to the curb, as well as putting some cones, safety cones out to block off a parking space or two as needed for that. A temporary construction fence is going to be installed around the perimeter of the construction site and will be encroaching into the public right-of-way, both on the Clinton and Chorus Street sides. So we'll be requiring an encroachment permit for those. The duration of the project, the applicant is requesting or anticipating only 2 months needed for the construction before it moves from the external to the internal phases of the construction where the staging materials would no longer be needed. However, the permit is good for a period up to 9 months. And so we'll at least go with that for the time being. And the recommendation based on the staff review is that we recommend that the temporary use permit for lots A and B, block 34, Phillips subdivision, be approved with the following conditions. Condition one, equipment shall not be idled between the hours of 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. 2, the temporary use permit shall expire on March 31st, 2022. 3, adequate signage identifying the sidewalk being closed to pedestrians and that a detour is in place to use the sidewalk on the north side of Clinton Street should be used by pedestrians, shall be added to the site plan. And 4, obtain an encroachment permit for the town from the town for right-of-way infringements on town sidewalks and parking spaces for the construction, fencing, and access. So with that, I believe that the applicant is in the audience. I think I heard him talking earlier, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys might have.
Thank you, TJ. Carl, you got anything to add? Or do you have anything you want to add?
Sorry, Doug, I can hardly.
Okay, do you have anything you want to add?
Just that, mentioned Preston, the fencing will be put up after the 4th of July weekend on approval, just to keep the weekend free. And the 2 months he's talking about will be on commencement of construction. I'll need to use it for the rest of the demo, then we have to do building permit. But once we get the building enclosed, then there's no access to the building from those 2 lots. So then they'll be not used anymore. The encroachment on the sidewalk only is in front of the existing building. And that's protection of pedestrians while we work on that part of the building because it goes up to the sidewalk. My plan is that once the fence is set up and we finish the demo, which should be like the first week and a half, say, of July, then we won't be doing anything for approximately a month by the time we get plans and permitting from the city. I will take the fence down, blocking the sidewalk, so that that is not infringed upon until we need it again and put it away. The rest of the fencing from in front of the building all the way around the corner will be off of the sidewalk so that that won't inhibit pedestrian traffic until you get in front of the building. The impact on the lots will be minimal. That it would be the level of deliveries, concrete at the time, and then setting trusses, and that's about it. There won't be any, you brought up a point, there won't be anything done after 5 o'clock and nothing done before 8 o'clock. And the cones he's talking about are on the west side. There's a handicap parking and one parking space behind it. I plan on coning those off for access during the day. And then when we're done working at night, opening those up so that the businesses, specifically Colorado Boy, will have their parking back, those 2 spaces. They don't open till 4 o'clock anyway, so I don't think it'd be too detrimental to them. And most of the employee parking, like TJ mentioned, will be behind the existing building where there's ample room. That's where they've been parking for the whole demolition process. I think that's it.
Thank you. Okay, at this time this is a public hearing, so I'll open it up for public comment. Preston, you see anybody online who's,
No hands raised, no, sir.
okay. All right. I'll close public comment.
I'd say looks like a pretty straightforward proposal. It's something I think we should support just because it's a historic structure and it's important that we support the reconstruction of our historic structures and then almost burned down like this. So I think it makes sense.
I don't think there's a better scenario. They own the lot. It's on the same side of the street. It's right next door. I mean, it can't really get any better. No one's here to complain that it's in their neighborhood.
Yeah, I'd say that with one downside will be the fact that one parking space has to be closed off in order to create that curb ramp to get in and out. But that, like you said, that's minimal impact compared to it.
Right, one of those is a handicap, but there's like, I think there's 2 more handicaps just around the corner on Clinton. So there's still,
Correct, sir.
yeah, so there's still 2 more handicap spots available. That was kind of the concern I had.
And those will be open during the day.
Yeah, it'll be open.
On the Clinton Street will be open.
Yeah, okay.
Ready for a motion? I move that we approve the temporary use permit. Do I need to say of the Phillips Lot C TUP with the following conditions? Equipment shall not be idle between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. Temporary permit shall expire March 31 of 22. Adequate signage identifying sidewalk being closed to pedestrians and that a detour is in place. Use the sidewalk on the north side of Clinton should be used by pedestrians. Shall be added to the site plan. And for obtain an encroachment permit from the town for right-of-way infringement on town sidewalks and parking spaces for construction fencing.
I'll second that.
A motion, have,
Mr. Chair, if I just might make a clarification real quick.
yes,
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to confirm. I thought I heard lots C and D in the motion. I just wanted to confirm that the temporary use permit is for lots A and B.
Okay, thank you. I read it off the top of this page. I read lot C TUP. So for lots A and B.
Oh, gotcha. I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's a little confusing, but yes, so it's lots A and B. Thank you.
Great.
okay, a motion, have a second, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Actually, let's do a roll call. since
Okay.
Thomas is on.
Okay.
So, Commissioner Hamilton,
Aye.
Commissioner Lisk,
Aye.
Commissioner Monty,
Yes, aye.
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Meyer,
Aye.
Mayor Clark,
Aye.
Chairperson Cantor.
Aye. Thank
There
you,
you go.
Mr. Tees.
There's one,
Get to work.
there's one thing off your list.
So you know that it was added, the encroachment permit, you know what that you have to do that?
Pardon?
It's part of the motion was an encroachment permit.
Correct.
Yep.
And I had that already, except I misunderstood the insurance part of it, that it has to be to the town, I believe.
Indemnify the town.
Correct. So I have to talk to the insurance companies for the contractor and Jenny Lee Phillips. But that's not a problem. So it'll be done before I start construction
Thank you.
and before I put a fence up even.
Awesome. Good luck.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I sure appreciate your time and consideration.
That was easy. That was easy on our side.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. You also. Stay dry, everybody.
We'll talk soon.
Our second item, also a public hearing, the application is preliminary plat, Riverfront Village Planned Unit Development. Location is Triangle Subdivision Lot 1. The address to be determined Highway 550, Zone General Commercial GC. Applicant Joel Cantor, Alpine Homes Ridgway LLC. Owner Alpine Homes Ridgway LLC.
Excellent. So this one, what we're going to be asking for is a continuance, but we want to chat a little bit about that. So just a little bit of background. This was originally brought to the Planning Commission in April, was continued in May, and then continued to this evening. We've been working diligently with the applicant and the development team on addressing the concerns that staff still has, and we're making good progress on that. But both the applicant team and staff didn't feel that it was ready to be brought forward to the Planning Commission this evening. So I know Preston sent out an email to the commissioners, taking some polling on a special meeting. So our request, and probably some dialogue if needed, is to have a special meeting on July 13th, probably at 6 p.m. or 5:30 p.m. at Town Hall, to hear this application. We think also that it's a complex application, a lot going on. So having a special meeting, an evening that's devoted to this project is warranted as well. So with that, if Preston wants to add anything, I'd ask him to do that. Otherwise, kind of open it up to discussion with the commission if needed.
Yeah, thanks, DJ. So just to jump in, hopefully at the tail end of my email to the last week, there was a little piece of, or a paragraph about the need to hold a special meeting, or the desire to hold a special meeting on or around July 13th. We recognize it's midsummer and folks have busy schedules or on vacation, working, and it runs the gamut. So I guess my request here would be that we get through the main portion of this item with the requested continuance, and if you all are amenable to searching through your calendars to find a date that might work for you all, I think that might be the best route, but that's just my suggestion. I'll leave it to you, Mr. Chair.
If we're going to continue it to a date, certainly probably ought to settle on the date.
Good point.
I'll go with the 13th. I'm never going anywhere ever again.
Can we have that in writing?
I saw Bill was going.
I am out from the 6th of July to the 16th, or through the 16th. So
How many people do we need?
For
Four.
I'm available.
I'm available.
I'm available.
I can be available.
You're off the hook.
all right, I'll be on the road.
Thomas, what about you?
I didn't hear what the actual proposed date was.
July 13th.
Unfortunately, I'm sorry, I will be away. I might be able to attend online. Let me just check my calendar here, but I will be out of town.
Understood. And online would be an option.
Sorry, just let me interrupt for a second. I will be in a location where I probably could be available. Would it be similar 5:30 in the evening time?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I think you can count me in on that for right now if you need it.
It sounds like that date works best for the applicant or the host.
Correct.
And so I think we should go with it, even though sadly Bill won't be able to join us.
Yeah. Maybe you could call it a satellite phone.
Yeah. Okay, this is a public hearing, so I'm going to go ahead and open this for public comment at this time. Any indication? No. Okay, I'll close public comment.
We need a motion to continue, right? Preston?
That's correct. There should be a proposed motion in that memo.
I motion to approve a continuance for applicant Jim Kehoe to take additional time to review and comply with the RMC requirements at a special meeting held on July 13th.
I'll second that.
I have a motion, I have a second. Any further discussion? Preston, you'd like to poll?
Commissioner Emelson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lisk,
Aye.
Commissioner Montague,
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson,
I
Mayor Pro Tem Meyer,
Aye.
Mayor Clark,
I get this on. I'm trying to figure, I don't know how to put up a second set.
Chairperson.
Aye. Okay. Okay, our third item is also a public hearing. The application is final plat, location Parkside subdivision lot 14. The address to be determined North Laura Street, the zone residential R. Applicant Josh and Therese Seal, owner Joshua C. Seal.
All right, you guys get to hear from me again for a little bit. So again, this was an application originally submitted for both a final plat and a variance for a lot width reduction back in April. That meeting was, at that meeting, it was that these applications were continued to this evening. And we have received a request from the applicant to continue once again. The reasons for the continuance is just to continue working through some of the issues. And we've been in communication with the applicants. They're making progress on those. And in fact, just today I got a letter from the HOA recommending approval, or at least approving from their standpoint, the supporting the subdivision itself. Furthermore, the applicant's original request was to include a variance, as I mentioned, but subsequently they've been working with their surveyor and team to meet the minimum lots width for all three lots, and they anticipate withdrawing that variance request as well. So with this, though, because some of the items were not able to be addressed in time to get a full staff review and pulled together for this meeting, staff would concur with the applicant request to continue to the July meeting. And so I do see Therese is here as well, and I defer to her if anyone has any questions for me.
Teresa, you want to add anything?
Hi. No, we just need a little more time. We're really close. We pretty much have everything together at this point. We just weren't able to submit it to meet the deadline, but we can submit it all tomorrow, basically.
Okay, thank you. This is a public hearing once again, so I'll open up for public comment. I'll close public comment. TJ, I have a question. You've got this identified once again as a final plat, but in your discussion of your conversation with me, you note in there that we believe as long as the plat notes on the original plat are retained in the amendment. So is this an amendment of the original plat, or is this a final plat standalone? I'm sorry to bring up that discussion again.
Yeah. No, and as we discussed, the amendment process in the code defers to the final plat process.
Okay.
So essentially from a procedural standpoint, it's a final plat, but from a what's the title of the plat going to say? It's going to say a final plat, a replat of lot 14 Parkside subdivision. So it's going to be essentially a new plat, not amending the current plat, but it's going to be a amendment of lot 14.
But then, as you say, all the plat notes on the original
Correct.
plat over. Okay.
That is correct. Yes.
All right. In other words, it's a replat, not an amended plat, but the process spells out in the code that it goes through the final plat process.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a bouncing ball I followed. Yep.
Clear as mud. Cool. So we need a motion again to
Yes.
continue. I will move that we continue this North Seal subdivision process to the July meeting.
Second.
Have a motion, have a second. Any further discussion? Preston, will you poll the commission, please?
Commissioner Emelson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lisk,
Aye.
Commissioner Montague,
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Meyer,
Aye.
Mayor Clark,
Aye.
Chairperson Canray.
Aye.
There you go.
Okay, next item, review of proposed updates to the landscaping regulations. TJ,
Well, on this one, you don't get to hear from me, you luckies. I'm gonna turn it on over. I believe Katie is on here.
Yes.
There she is. So I'll turn it on over to Katie, a planner with us, CPS, and she'll walk through the changes with everyone.
Perfect. Thanks, TJ. And Preston, I was hoping I could share my screen. So hopefully that's as easy as the other meetings. Okay.
Give me 10 seconds.
All right. No worries.
You should be good to go, Kate.
So we should log in on Zoom if we want to see it.
That's correct. Katie, is what you're going to be showing already in the packet, or is this a standalone PowerPoint?
Yeah, so I created a PowerPoint for it. I'm happy to just kind of run through it. It kind of follows what the staff report is, and then I can send you all a copy of it if that's helpful. Sorry, I thought you guys would have a projector, but it sounds like you don't have something up on the screen.
Not currently.
Okay. All right. So I'll go ahead and just run through it. Again, it just follows very similarly to what the staff report says. And then we can hopefully dive into those scenarios at the very end. So, all right. So the goal of tonight's presentation is to go over the most recent updates to the landscape regulations. The updates are based on the conversations that we had at the last meeting and at the last Planning Commission meeting, as well as follow-up comments that were sent via all the planning commissioners after you had some time to digest the updates and the discussion that we had at the last meeting. So first, I'll start out by running through the more major comments of the updates. And we've identified 11 major items to address, which I'll get into, and I'll show how these, or I'll talk about how these items were addressed in the most recent updates. And then, like I touched on earlier, I'll go over 5 different lot scenarios that we put together to kind of give you a sense of how the regulations will apply based on various lot sizes and zoning districts. And then we'll have some time at the end for any further discussion or questions, although I'm sure a bulk of what we'll be discussing is part of the scenarios that we'll get into, and that'll show how the regulations will play out in real time. But of course, throughout this whole discussion, feel free to chime in with any questions or feedback. This will just kind of be a back and forth dialogue. So just a quick refresher on the background and the request for these regulations. Tonight's meeting is the second time we'll have met to discuss the draft regulations. Last month's Planning Commission meeting provided us with some really great insight about how the commission sees the regulations being applied and how things can be improved to meet the community's needs. So for tonight's meeting, we've provided the memo that details the discussion items that we'll get into, which we'll get into in the next slides. And then the memo also includes both a clean version of the updated landscape regulations, as well as the red line version of the latest red lines, or the latest updates. And just a reminder about the intent of the regulations. What's being proposed is a comprehensive code update to address landscape regulations for the town based on feedback from the Planning Commission, staff, and the community. The goal of these regulations is to achieve the following, which is meeting the 2019 master plan and 2020 strategic goals, promoting water conservation, creating flexibility and clarity of regulations for community members, increasing ease of implementation and enforcement for staff. So those are the major goals. Tonight's task is to review and discuss the updates and potentially make a recommendation to town council or continue it for further discussion. So now I'll kind of dive into those discussion items that are listed in the staff memo. Like I mentioned, there are 11 there, and I'm just going to go ahead and run through each one. And we, again, this is open for dialogue, so I'll present it and I'll let you know what the updates are. And then if you have any questions or feedback, I'm happy to discuss that. So discussion item number 1, replacing the term xeriscape with waterwise. This one's pretty straightforward. It sounds like there was discussion previously with Susan Carter with CSU Extension, and she actually advised against using the term xeriscape. So we went ahead and just updated the regulations to remove the word xeriscape and replace it with waterwise. This way it won't cause any confusion for community members about what xeriscape actually means. And hopefully that's pretty straightforward for everyone reading the code and interpreting it. So discussion item number 2, establishing a clear trigger for when a landscape plan is required. So the comment for this discussion item was that the regs still don't clearly state what triggers the need for a landscape plan. Therefore, it leaves it open for its interpretation. So the update we're proposing here is to choose language that the commission would agree to. And then we could approach this a couple different ways, which I'll get into next. And what I've done here is drafted 2 different options for language that could be added to what would be section 773B, which talks about the applicability and when a landscape plan is required. So you should all have it. Let me just double check that you have that language with you. Yes. Okay. So in the staff report, there's a couple different options I've listed here for discussion item number 2. So the update could be 2 things. It could be that number 1 option or number 2. Option number 1 says all existing lots and uses at the time of the adoption of these regulations will be considered legal non-conforming. Any new construction or change of use need to meet the landscaping standards of this chapter. So essentially that's saying that any new construction or change of use, those are kind of the big terminologies there, that would trigger the need for a landscape plan. And then option 2 gets into more specific requirements or more specific triggers for this. And that reads, the following projects shall comply with the landscaping standards set forth in this chapter. A, projects which require a site plan review. B, new commercial, residential, or mixed use construction. C, new landscape projects with an aggregate landscape area equal to 500 square feet or greater. D, rehabilitation projects with an aggregate landscape area equal to 1,000 square feet or greater. E, change of use. Or F, public rights of way improvement. So based on those 2 options, and again, we can kind of change the terminology if those don't fit the specific needs, but is the commission leaning one way or another towards what works better for applicability?
I have a question on C and D. New landscape projects with an aggregate, the 500 square feet or greater, or rehabilitation projects for of 1,000 square feet or greater. Would any of those, if, for instance, I just eliminated about 1,500 square feet of high water use grass, sure. If this were in place, would I have to get a permit to do that and have to meet every requirement for the landscaping project, which if that's true, I believe would dissuade people from eliminating high water use grasses. So
That was my concern as well. I mean, I understand where this is coming from. In other words, trying to get people to have to pony up a site plan and do the right thing, but these numbers seem kind of low for forcing people. I mean, again, to me, in my mind, I agree with you 100%. It de-incentivizes the trend that I think we all want to see, which is get rid of some lots and put in some.
How about number 1?
oh, I see what you mean. Instead of doing two at all, just stick with
Yeah.
number one. I guess that's maybe, I mean, I think there are downsides to that as well, but it's more straightforward for sure.
What are the downsides?
Any new construction or change of use?
New construction's obvious. What does change of use mean?
Good question.
Oh, I thought somebody knew, just not me.
Does that include public right of way?
No, because this would be,
Does Katie know what it means?
The change of use question, yes, that would be any land use change for the property.
So it was a house and you decided to have cows, so then it went to agricultural?
which can't be done in town, but that's an example.
What's a more reasonable change of use?
Like single family to multifamily could be a trigger, residential to commercial.
Or single family to duplex.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, I think that one seems reasonable. It's really
It's
simple.
okay. My concern was, and I guess it makes sense, but like, in your view, Katie, would like a new ADU, or even I mean, ADUs they're always so interesting in the issues they raise because in some cases an ADU might only be a separate room in an existing house and not new construction per se. But that would trigger this, right?
No. Oh, because that's a change of use?
I mean, that's the question. What do you think, Katie? Is it ADU? I guess does it?
Yeah, I think based on how it reads right now, I would interpret that as new construction, but maybe we can elaborate on that language so it's very clear. It sounds like Planning Commission doesn't feel like an ADU would need to trigger the landscape improvement. So maybe we change that to any new construction of a single family home or something more substantial than something like an ADU.
Seems like an ADU, if it was new construction, maybe would require a landscape review. But like John's saying, if you're just gonna designate room in your house, then no. So maybe the issue is to clarify change of use, because I like the simpler one.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we could probably make it work.
But the problem with an ADU, we have requirements. You have to have an additional parking space on site, which triggers a site plan review.
Yeah, I'd like to just chime in for a quick second. I mean, I think that if I understand correctly, if you have a main house and then, a year later you decide to build an ADU, then I think that requires landscaping situation. You're going to be changing the topography, the site plan and all that. And I think that would definitely trigger that. I think I like option one a little bit less than option two because it's a little more vague, but I see the issues around number two. But the thing that I'm concerned about too, also, I think is a little unclear is change of use. I mean, what if I have a bunch of rocks in my front yard and shrubs, and I decide that I want to change it to something different, but it's still landscaping? Does that also consider change of use, or is it just more of a physical change of use that you're saying?
That would be
Yeah.
because you're not changing the land use designation of the property.
Right, but again, you are changing the landscaping. So at what point does that get triggered? If you want to, tear down a bunch of trees and put up a bunch of rocks, or vice versa, does that actually trigger a landscaping plan or no?
That was essentially my question.
That's the crux of the question here, I think, is,
What does change of use mean?
well, more that like going back to, because I mean, just redoing your front yard is not a change of use.
No, not.
I don't think anybody here would claim that's a change of use, but I think Bill and I started the discussion by saying we felt like at least those numbers in the option number 2 of 500 square feet, 1,000 square feet, requiring a whole new application and plan and everything, when all you want to do is tear out some grass and put in some ground cover that doesn't require as much water, that's going to de-incentivize that. So how do we deal with that? One, if some of us like option 2 better, my suggestion might be to make those numbers higher. Have the new landscape projects or the area of more like 1,500 square feet or 2,000 square feet, and that the rehabilitation be more like 2,500 or something. I mean, we're pulling numbers out of a hat, but I think that's the only way we're going to avoid de-incentivizing people taking small areas of their yard and getting rid of grass and putting in some low water ground.
Yeah, I would say upping those maybe from 500 to 1,000, 1,000 to 1,500 or 2,000. If it's 2,000, it's going to be super noticeable. So,
And what do we
but
call
just
it?
bumping those up, I think would deal with it, with most people's issues.
What do we call it? A rehabilitation project? What is that?
That's where you're taking, that's Bill's example,
Changing your.
Yeah.
taking an existing
Yeah.
landscape and redoing it.
Low water.
Is that your take, Katie?
Yeah. Like landscape improvements, essentially.
Changing an existing landscape rather than creating a new landscape from scratch.
Hey, Katie, it's Preston. Where did the square footage thresholds come from? The 500 and the 1,000? Are those arbitrary, or did you see that in other municipal code?
Yeah, I think TJ, maybe you can recall exactly where that came from, but I think we had felt like that was appropriate for the town lot sizes and the projects that occur. But I think that has been the industry standard that we've seen, or town standards. So it sounds like, yeah. Go ahead,
I
TJ.
was just going to say that another approach, right? Again, we're kind of throwing some stuff out there, seeing what's sticking. Another approach rather than square footage is a percentage. You know, what's a significant percentage? You know, because that would change. That's consistent between lot sizes, whereas total square footage is not. So again, we're just kind of throwing something out there, options, seeing what fits. And based on the conversation, I think I would urge the commission to move in the direction of a percentage on these two, if so desired. The other thing I would just point out is that you know, associated with short-term rentals and ADUs, with option 2, actually either option, and Katie touched on it, we could add provisions under each of those to either exempt certain types or include certain types of those, right? So ADUs that require a new structure or accessory structure, or new construction of parking, right? So we can set those parameters if desired in either of these approaches as well.
TJ, I like your idea of percentage.
Me too. Me too. Yeah.
I agree.
So we, TJ,
Okay.
Suggested a percentage of total lot square footage, as opposed to a hard number that would not work for small lots as well as big lots.
Did we
I think
talk about
percentages
percentages?
has merit. Yeah.
Did we talk about specific percentages?
No, we haven't talked specifics yet. If there, DJ, if there's something out there so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel with percentages, I think I would certainly like to see that. We can bat it around, but I think we're going to be batting lots of stuff around tonight. So.
Well, I'll throw my 2 cents on this. It's going to be consistent with what you've probably heard from me before too. There are so many moving parts on the landscaping regulations that I would recommend not getting bogged down in whether it's 25, 20, 30%. Come up with something that feels right. Let's see how it works in the real world for a little bit and then make adjustments. The other thing that I believe is still in here, I can't recall, is the town manager has the ability to provide a waiver as well. So there's a little bit of relief built into this as well. If we do miss it by, Katie, is it 10%?
Yeah.
Still, So if we miss it by 10%, there's a 20%, well, I guess 10% up leeway to work with. And then when we start seeing what it looks like in the real world, we can reevaluate it. And it's a simple tweak to change 15 to 20 or 20 to 15, right? Once we have the structure in there, whatever it is, if you wanted my recommendation, I'd say somewhere in the 25 to 30% feels right. That means that it's not a huge project that's taking up a whole lot, but it's a pretty significant project. You know, I would say don't go much lower than 25%.
I like 25%.
Sorry, Thomas.
I was just going to say, I just off the top of my head, I like 25% too, just as a starting point. I'm looking at, you know, imagining the size of a lot, and I figure, well, if someone's going to impact roughly a quarter of that, that seems, you know, it's starting to get in the realm of, oh, that's going to be a reasonable sized job. If it's a little less, then yeah, maybe we don't sit there and nitpick too much. But as TJ is saying, maybe just as a sense of a place to start, I'd throw out 25% too. I think that's reasonable.
And do we want the rehabilitation projects to be a greater number, more like 30% or 35%? Or does it, I'm struggling with whether we need to distinguish between new or rehabilitation. And then thoughts?
You know, I could lump them together, really.
Kind of obviously.
Yeah.
You know, I don't see the need to differentiate. But we are talking about aggregate landscape area rather than total lot size, correct?
Well, the aggregate landscape project being whatever percentage, say 25% of the lot size, and the aggregate just means if you're changing this section over here and this section over here, it's the total square footage added together. That's the way I.
So it is relative to the entire lot size.
Okay, that's what I.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So would we want to, I mean, is there any reason to be omitting the footprint of the building?
So in other words, the wording would be something along the lines of 25% of landscape projects that
Landscape area.
entail 25% of the lot minus the building footprint.
Yeah, something along those lines, but or maybe you just say 25% of any landscaping or unbuilt square footage. I don't know.
Seems like the easiest way to do it, we just say subtract the building footprint.
Well, we actually have that already defined in here, and we'll get into the scenarios. I think if we use the term required landscaped area,
Yeah.
that's the term that's used, which is the inverse of the lot coverage, which covers buildings, covered porches, sidewalks, walkways, driveways.
Right. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. And
So
I agree.
25%?
25%.
Yes.
25%.
Sounds
And
good.
Katie and TJ, what do you think about us just, if we're going this route, lumping new and rehabilitation projects together and just have it apply to either at 25%?
Yeah. I think that works. TJ, did you have any input on that?
No, I think that works great. And then just from a practical standpoint, it's practically a percentage between 25 and 35%, which I think still feels right for either.
Good.
Okay. All right, so hearing consensus, I'll go ahead and make that change to incorporate that option number 2, changing that square footage to the 25% instead and lumping those items C and D together. And again, that will be updated in section 773B, which is the applicability. So if there's no further comments or discussion on that, I'll go ahead and move on to discussion item number 3. So this one is requiring all areas of lot to be treated to prevent dirt lots. This is one we discussed at the last meeting, and it seemed everyone was in agreement that there should be a provision stating that all areas of a lot need to be treated. This is because if there weren't a provision like this in the code, there could be a potential for someone to have an uncovered, untreated dirt area. So we've updated the regs to now add a new provision, which will be in section 776A, and it just simply states all areas on a lot must be treated with landscaping or remain native. Discussion item number 4 is categorizing.
Can I
Yeah.
interrupt? I do have a concern on this one. Sorry to be such an nitpicker.
That's okay.
Remain native. That's a little problematic, especially with as many, you know, I'm picturing a lot of the vacant lots around town being developed, and what's native on a lot of those lots could be anything from pasture grass to noxious weeds. So, I mean, I guess the solution that maybe, I think we need to make sure that remain native doesn't exempt weeds, and especially noxious weeds. But I just, that stuck out to me as a concern. How people could say, well, native on this lot when I built my home was weeds, and you know, basically bindweed and spotted knapweed or something. And you know, obviously noxious weeds, you know, I think probably should be mentioned in here already somewhere. But even something like bindweed and crabgrass, even though they're not noxious weeds, I don't think they should qualify as native. So I'm not sure what the answer is to that wording wise, but 30% benefit.
Yeah, regarding the noxious weeds, that was something we had discussed at the last meeting. So that was an update. It wasn't one of the major items we'll get into, but that has been updated in 777D, which covers ground cover. And then there's a statement in that last part of it, which says all soil must remain free of noxious weeds as defined as Uray County Weed Manager by the Uray County Weed Manager. So hopefully that should cover it in terms of the noxious weeds.
Okay.
This is TJ. I think it's a simple strike through on the or remain native. We define what landscaping is, and that I don't think that that's a substantive change to make that clear.
That makes sense. Great.
So we'll go ahead and just change that statement. It will just say all areas on a lot must be treated with landscaping. Pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, so discussion item. Yeah, go ahead.
Is what landscaping, air quotes, is that just defined somewhere?
Yeah, so if you take a look at landscaping required 776, it talks about landscaped area, and it says it may include a combination of trees, shrubs, ground covers, live and non-live, decorative, landscape stone or rock, or other landscape material that does not conflict with the provisions.
Great, thank you. I just want to make sure it was just defined somewhere, so thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so item number 4, categorizing grasses appropriately. So this was another item that we spent some time on at the last meeting, and there was some, misinterpretation, or there can be misinterpretation of grasses because they can be used in context very differently. Same with turf. So after our last meeting, we went ahead and updated a few sections in the new regulations to help clarify how grasses are viewed in context. So for example, if you take a look at 776A2I, which describes the live ground cover, that now includes the term native grasses and turf. And then if you look at the one right below that, which describes non-live ground cover, that includes the terminology artificial turf. And then if you look at 77D, which describes general turf standards, that now states that native non-irrigated grass, such as prairie grasses, may be used in areas of low use, low visibility. So we feel like with these updates throughout the regs, this should hopefully make it more clear that where the different types of grasses apply within each regulation. Okay, hearing no comments, I'll go ahead and move on to discussion item number 5. So this is clarifying intent and interpretation of landscaped area being viewable in the front yard. This item was, again, something we discussed at length in the last meeting. It seemed that across the board, it was confusing and perhaps misleading what was meant by the provision that landscaping must be viewable from the adjacent right-of-way. So this is a provision that's very similar to what's in the current code, but needs to be updated to be more clear. So we discussed what was the intent of this, what the intent may have been, and it seems it may have been a way to prevent people from only landscaping the backyards or non-viewable areas of a lot. So what we did was we went ahead and updated the regulations to take out the phrase adjacent to right-of-way. And now the statement just clearly says at least 25% of the required landscaped area may be provided in the front yard of the property. And then with our comprehensive updates in the code, we'll be properly defining what front yard is so that it's properly defined and the provision's clear, understood, and it can be enforced. Discussion item number 6 is reducing the minimum number of trees and shrubs in the landscaping requirements table. That's the table in 776. So this was a big one to discuss. We definitely got the sense that the number of trees and shrubs being required was too high for what the town's looking to achieve in terms of flexibility and water conservation. So with these updates, we significantly reduced the amount of trees and shrubs required for all residential uses. And then we minimized the number of shrubs for non-residential and mixed uses because the number of trees was already reduced for those. We left that the same, but if after reviewing the scenarios, we still feel like these numbers need to be reduced even more, we can easily update that table. But we feel like this has been a pretty big push to reduce those numbers, and they should hopefully be more in line with what the town's looking for. Just another note, we also added a footnote to the table. It now says that 4 shrubs can be counted for 1 required tree. So this helps to create some flexibility and helps to alleviate cost constraints of having to water and plant some very large trees, large and new trees. So let's stay tuned on this one before we dive too deep in. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions and discussion on this, but I think it'll be really helpful if we can take a look at those scenarios together at the end, and then we can talk about how that table applies and whether we think it's appropriate. Discussion item number 7 is allowing existing trees to count towards the required landscaping. So in our discussions, it was clear that keeping existing trees was important, but only if they were considered to be in good health. There were some questions about who makes that determination. So that's been updated to clarify that the town manager will make that determination. We also included a statement saying that trees are considered to be in good, that trees that are considered to be in good condition shall be counted as 1.5 trees for the minimum requirement. So with these updates, much like the last discussion item, this helps to create flexibility, also to alleviate cost constraints of having to plant and water new trees. Discussion item number 8 is allowing artificial turf and increasing percentage of high water turf allowed. We heard very clearly that artificial turf should be allowed, so we've updated the regs to account for this. We also heard that there should be flexibility for people who want to use turf and how they think it's appropriate. So we went ahead and increased the percentage of allowable high water turf, such as Kentucky bluegrass, to be 2,500 square feet or 20% of the required landscape area instead of 1,500 or 10%. So just increase that allowable high water turf provision.
Did we want to increase the high water turf? I don't remember that.
Yeah, I don't remember that either.
That was a public comment that someone saying if you've got kids, you need durable turf out there.
Yeah, I questioned that. That's the one thing in here that I questioned, why we would be increasing that.
Well, especially since there's so many other species of turf that are, I mean, for years now, that one I remember from when I was landscaping decades ago was called blue grama, but Kentucky bluegrass is not the way to go at all anymore, unless I'm mistaken. What do you guys think? I mean, I think maybe allowing the percentage of turf to go up a little bit, but not, I don't think we should be allowing specifically Kentucky bluegrass. That's really outdated. Katie and TJ, do you feel differently?
Yeah, so I think I might have heard some comments about that in the last meeting, but again, that's easily something we can update. We can lower that back down, or we can change the terminology so it takes out calling out Kentucky bluegrass specifically. Yeah, if we think it's more appropriate to just keep it how it was, which was 1,500 or 10%, whichever is lower, then I think we should probably just go back to that.
I think we should go back to that.
But I would like to allow the artificial turf.
Yeah,
I think
that's fine.
there's no question about the artificial turf. I think we need to specifically disallow Kentucky bluegrass. I mean, there's no reason to allow that anymore.
And there's too many options.
You can buy sod these days that's made up of drought resistant grasses that are not Kentucky bluegrass. And they're just as pretty, they're just as nice, you water them. They don't require as much water. That's my take. I don't know if that, I'm basing that on what I knew when I was landscaping decades ago. So maybe things.
So do you want to go so far as to say it's not allowed, or do you want to just take the term out of the code so as not to be directly encouraging it?
I really think we should have something in the regulations that specifically say that if there's going to be turf, if there's going to be sod, whatever you want to call it, it needs to be drought resistant, drought tolerant.
And don't we already have a section that suggests what type of trees, or says what type of trees can't be?
Species.
Yeah, wouldn't it be maybe in there?
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah,
What do you think, Katie?
Yeah, so that's in 7711. We have a preferred species list and a prohibited species. So that could be included as, number 3, which prohibits Kentucky bluegrass specifically.
Is that just because that's the one we know of? Like, are there others that are very similar? If we're gonna designate specifically, should we be more educated on it?
Yeah, I think there should be a sentence in a preferred species that addresses when a landscape is going to include some percentage of turf grass, that it be a drought tolerant species.
That seems reasonable.
so would it be appropriate to just eliminate the use of the term high water turf? And just say turf and then refer to the species prohibition area?
Yeah, just reading that provision. We do call out native and non-irrigated grasses as well, but I don't really see a need, unless TJ, you think otherwise, that we need to call out specifically high water turf.
Well, so the way this whole thing is structured is focusing on low water use native species. And in this particular section, D, talking about ground cover, is almost the preferred alternative, if you will. And then we call out specifically turf to allow for the specific situations that turf might be allowed. And so this is the only place, I believe, and Katie will just confirm this, but where this high water turf is actually discussed. And the idea here is that at some point, there might be locations where high water turf, such as whatever, and I think, Katie, what we can do is just take out the references to any species, except for the species list. And what this is an exception to the rule, essentially. So it says that in areas of high use, you can use high water turf. Now this is vague, right? And so how this is going to play through, remember back to our conversation from before, is somebody's going to submit something, we're going to review it, and I would suspect that most people who are in charge of reviewing and interpreting and administering this regulation would understand that this is a water-wise code. And so they would take the interpretation to say that this is the exception to the rule. And then again, the interpretation would be that's not allowed in any of these areas, or yes, this is the only place that it's allowed. And that, again, going back to what we talked about before, would be an administrative decision. And if they didn't agree with that, it would go through the appeals process. So I don't want to necessarily get too bogged down in that terminology, because we have that. And I don't think I want to go to a point of defining high water turf or high use area. I think I like it being somewhat subjective, because I think that it helps in the interpretation of that. And like I said, I think we have some caveats in there, and I might defer to Preston on what your thoughts on that might be, comfort level and your level of what you're thinking we should get specific on, if anything.
Yeah, TJ, Preston. Yeah, I think I agree with refraining from getting or formally defining high water turf, or because right now there is no definition for high water turf or native non-irrigated grass, right? Like for high water turf, there's just a paren such as Kentucky bluegrass, which what I heard you say, why don't we remove that and just defer to the species list? I don't know if I missed your question, but I remember hearing those points, and I agree that I don't know how in detail we want to get on those definitions.
I guess my pointed question is, are you comfortable with some flexibility and interpretation, or do you want to get too prescriptive? But what I just heard you say is that you're comfortable in the gray.
It's fair.
And that dialogue for the commissioners is simply to say that, we're going to be living in the gray somewhere. This is, from a staff perspective, a comfortable gray area.
I think that works. I think we don't want to be too ridiculous and being super specific, but at the same time, need to guard against people coming in and being absolutely ridiculous and planning some super high water usage thing and be able to prevent that. And that gray staff area should be able to prevent that. Is that?
I would hope so. I guess I'm still a little concerned about using the term high water use at all. But I'm open to trying to be flexible and more subjective and giving staff. I'm always concerned about putting too much on staff, particularly when we're putting all these things in here that are to the town managers.
You already have to go out and check the trees.
Putting Preston on the spot. But I get that we need to have some flexibility built into this. It's the same with sign regs. If you get too carried away, you make it really hard to enforce. So we didn't have smoke all the time.
Would it not be a little more understandable to the layman to simply say sod, meaning something that 9 times out of 10 gets rolled out, and I think turf could be construed as anything you mow, but I think what we're trying to get at here is sod, is something that's delivered and and laid down. It might just make life a little bit easier for you if people are thinking, oh, sod. Does that make any sense?
That makes sense. My question would be, or my thought is, not everyone saw it, some people see, right? So
Right.
There seems to be an inherent difference there. So, but I make a great point. I mean, trying to get away from the turf term to something different.
Just something that's a little more specific I actually seeded one whole section of my yard, which I do not mow. And I seeded it with, with tall pasture grasses. Yeah,
Prairie type grass.
yeah. Uh, but I wouldn't consider that turf. But maybe someone would. I'm just trying to imagine what people are going to show up at your desk with.
Yeah.
Make it as easy for you as possible.
Well, I appreciate that. The way you describe that grass that you don't mow, that you don't really have to dress at all, it sounds like. Do you have to water it?
I haven't watered it yet this year.
Just to get it established.
Yeah.
It seems like that would fall under native, non-irrigating grass, such as prairie grasses, but, the point's well taken. Katie, TJ, what are your thoughts on amending the word turf in some way?
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly called it out in 777, and maybe that's just causing more, confusion or question about it than it needs to. So maybe it just needs to be removed altogether. So E would be taken out, and it would just, the landscaping standards would just be trees, shrubs, and ground cover. And then we wouldn't get into the turf because, again, that opens it up for more questions and confusion. But it's still clearly defined in landscaping required, which says live ground cover is things like native grasses. And then non-live ground cover could include things like artificial turf.
I see a problem there with if we're seeding, right now, our only provision for issuing a CO if there's no landscaping is it's a temporary CO and it's weather related. And most of the HOAs will withhold part of your deposit if you don't have anything growing there. So we need to figure out a way to resolve that.
Okay.
So I have a thought on the turf or sod. One thing that I'm thinking is from formatting, maybe we can just indent turf, that paragraph E under D. So it's like a D1 to show that it's a type of ground cover rather than its own thing. I kind of like the idea of keeping it in there because, again, I think the point of this is to allow an exception to the rule in some capacity.
There is, we haven't talked about this yet, but there is an exception in the exceptions and deviations 7710. So it's specifically called out high water turf in exceptions.
Oh. Yeah, that's right. Well, if we might, because it seems like this one might have a couple tentacles in a couple different areas. Katie and I can evaluate what this one turns out to be. And I do think it's somewhat of a confined discussion though, because high water turf, high water use, those aren't terms that we have splattered throughout. We can come up with a better vernacular for that. I think I'm understanding the concern. Set the parameters a little bit tighter, but and not incentivize or get people to really want to do high water stuff.
And TJ expressed it just real quick, nitpicking, but under the high water turf exception 7710, just there's another reference to Kentucky bluegrass that could come out.
Yep.
Yeah.
I just wanted to throw in something that's slightly off topic on this, but just in most of my architectural experience dealing with clients, and I'm sure many of you understand this and have seen it, most people are just trying to get the house built and just get through that. And most of the time when we talk to people about landscaping, they have no idea what they're going to do. And they have no idea if they're going to be able to afford it. And so it tends to be put off till the very last minute. And most of the time, as we see, it's when they have the least amount of budget left. And so then we end up with some situations which are, you know, I think what we're trying to prevent. But I just thought I'd throw it out there. I think you all probably know that, but it's a very ongoing challenge, you know, in terms of the cost of construction and then making all these decisions about the house, and then we can't deal with that. And I personally have run into this many times, and I find that it's actually really frustrating because you do the disservice of, you know, a really great design if then you just have a really crappy lot there and it's not being dealt with, and then, you know, maybe it takes 3 or 4 or 5 years for that to happen. And so I realize that's why we're doing this, but I just thought everything I was hearing, I wanted to throw that back in there on the table, but that doesn't change anything. So thank you.
That's exactly what we're trying to address. I mean, I think we've talked about it several times where we want to change that tendency and make people have to think about their landscaping up front, because it is, it's a major part of what the overall effect of their property is going to be when you go from a vacant lot to a new home.
You know, yes, and just building a bit on Thomas's comment, I think having something up front that that mentions your irrigation system, how to get irrigation to all these live bits of landscaping was certainly a surprise to me when I built my house 10 years ago, and you know, and you know, I had all these grand schemes of plantings, but hand watering them didn't work. So then I had to, you know, retrofit with a irrigation system, which probably cost significantly more than had I incorporated that as part of my landscaping plan. But I think the one thing I haven't seen in this is an upfront statement about how to get drip irrigation, how to get how to keep things alive, and an irrigation system as part of a landscaping plan. Because if people just roll out sod, for instance, or they just stick trees in and think that they're going to keep them alive by hand watering, they will be sorely disappointed, as I was.
So you're talking about the proper or standard maintenance and upkeep of certain items. Now, I don't know, you're saying that there's nothing in the proposed.
Nothing that I've seen. It does mention irrigation and drip irrigation, but it doesn't mention an actual irrigation system or the ability to keep the live landscaping pieces alive.
So that's a good point. My first thought is, I don't know that it's the responsibility of a municipal code to recommend to people what the proper way of going about that is, or what type of equipment to use. But again, that's a good point that we could explore providing that information in the application. You know what I mean? So
yes,
I just
not to require it perhaps, but simply to mention that, that some provision needs to be made for keeping what you use as landscaping alive. Sure. So
I would actually stick my, sorry for interrupting, stick my neck out and say, given the drought and what appears to be not just a drought, but the aridification of the West, I think it might be a very controversial but necessary step to say we do require drip irrigation.
I support that.
I think it's going to be controversial. It's going to be challenging. I don't think we necessarily need to tackle it tonight, obviously. But I would argue, I think Bill's point's a really good one. Dragging hoses around and watering manually is not efficient. It's not the best way to keep things alive with the least amount of water as possible.
To add to Thomas's point, who is going to enforce all this? Does this all fall to the building inspector? Because I just built 2 years ago and I had to submit a landscape plan, which we drew a couple trees on there and shrubs, and they're like, oh, you don't have to, you can put them wherever you want. This is just a plan that you submit. And it was never mentioned again.
Right.
So we're gonna go to all these lengths, but unless we're looking at like hiring another person that's gonna enforce this, it's kind of,
Good point.
I don't get where it's ever gonna get enforced, because I think that the building inspector probably has his hands full and the town enforces everything on a complaint basis.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna agree with that. That has been my experience many times, and that's why I brought it up, was that even people with good intentions wanting to do a bunch of landscaping, even if it's minimal, often, run out of time or money at the end. And like you said, unfortunately, then, it is possible in the certain situation where it'll slip through the cracks, and then these places won't be dealt with for a long time. And then we have weeds and other things. And so I think we're all on the same track here. But yeah, John, I would agree with you. I think that as much as it's controversial to encourage someone to take on the extra expense of putting in an irrigation system, which I know very well is very expensive, in my property at least, it has been stupendous to be able to just use all the drip irrigation. Everything's really minimalized. I have a electronic system that I can check anywhere I'm at, and it cues in with the weather station so that it tells me, oh, it rained today, I'm not even going to water for you. I mean, the technology is great now, and it does take a bit of an investment. But I agree with you, John, that this is something that we need to encourage to be consistent with this whole policy across the board if we're going to be effective.
Well, to go back to what Bill said, I did send a link to Shay back when Denver Water Organization had sent out that Waterwise Smart booklet, and it covers stuff like the drip irrigation system and how you can get one. I mean, it has all that information in there, and I was telling Shay it would be nice to have something like that for the town of Ridgway, or I don't know how you use something like that, but or how to implement it into the town of Ridgway. But I thought it was a great idea, starting point that anybody could use.
And I think to your point, Preston, rather, we might have to end up requiring it, but I think making that information available to people is probably the way to start on that road. First, to familiarize people with the concept of
Right systems.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think the other thing to follow up here is 7713, which says that if you don't manage this and they die, you need to replace it.
Right.
So that requirement still sits with the owner. We can give them the advice and say you should use an irrigation system and not require it today. I think that's probably the best approach.
So just to finish my thought, I don't think that it means we shouldn't do this, but if we're gonna do this work, how's it gonna be enforced? How are we gonna follow through? Otherwise, it's just a pamphlet that sits on a table.
Well, I think we throw it back at town council, and I realize I'm talking to myself here.
It happens to a lot of us old people.
And council needs to make the budgetary choices to make sure we have the resources to enforce it for sure.
And this can only be for new construction. It can't go back on people who already.
What do you mean, the drip irrigation and stuff? like that,
Just
or
the
all
whole
of this? I mean,
policy, like we say, in one section about how if your stuff dies off, you have to replace it. There's no follow-up on that. Do we actually want to follow up on that?
I think we want to follow up on it on new construction for
Yeah.
the first X number of years, and how we do that is definitely a challenge. But I mean, one of the first things we talked about was the question of, the landscape plan, at what point. So we came up with 25, even an existing home that was making a 25% change in their landscape would have to submit, they're going to have to dive into this process. So we have built into this some places where even existing homes are going to have to pony up. And again, that just points out the need for staffing to enforce it.
And so how does that go to council? You're gonna do it?
This whole package goes to council for
Okay.
approval.
Okay.
That should be one of the bullet points for discussion.
And just to clarify too, irrigation is covered in the updates. So if you take a look at 774A, which is the landscape plan requirements, number 2, and then 7 is method of, and then we changed that language because we had talked about this at the last meeting. We had initially required irrigation in that statement, but we've updated it now because there were concerns about affordability for people installing whole new irrigation systems. And so now it says on your landscape plan, there must be a method of establishing and maintaining plant materials. So we've kept that kind of general so that people can install whatever they find works for their irrigation. And then there's also a provision in 777G, which specifically talks about irrigation. And then it goes into the provisions of what that irrigation would be. So they're limited to the hours of 6 p.m. to 9 a.m. They should all have moisture sensors installed, like Tom was talking about. So I think we've got you guys covered on that. But if there are issues with that language, let me know.
Thank you.
Yeah, the only thing I might suggest on under 2 VII or Latin 7.
Yeah.
Method of establishing and I would say irrigating plant materials, just so that they understand that maintaining them is irrigating that requires water. Just might be clearer.
Okay.
That's the.
Got it.
I think that makes sense.
Cool.
Okay.
Maintaining is
Moving
just a
right
little
along.
vague.
I don't want to beat it too deep here, but why the heck not? One other question, because I heard it come up a lot, is the drip irrigation. In the section that Katie just referenced, G irrigation has a few standards underneath. Again, if you do this system, if you're using this type of means to establish and maintain your system, here are standards we'd like you to do. One could be that we could put in some language that a drip system for plants, for trees and shrubs would be preferred. Would that be amenable?
I like that. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think we're gonna have to offer classes.
Well, you would hope that these people are hiring people to do these things too.
Yeah.
At least the new construction, I think we're really, hammering on that one, that this is not necessarily, the normal, just your normal neighbor. These are significant construction projects that would warrant a contractor.
And, again, this is sort of 30,000 foot level stuff, but, I know we have a building permit packet that we give to people who are considering developing a parcel into a new home or whatever. And there should be a mention in that of how your landscape is as important as your
Bathroom?
your bathroom, your flooring, your curtains, it's a
Your Miss Liberty.
it's a major component of your entire project that should be considered right at the outset, and just as kind of an educational piece. And I'm sure we've already talked about that on some of the I'd like to see that happen. All right, moving on.
All right, so we'll go on to discussion item number 9. This is removing street tree requirement for residential uses. So we discussed this at our last meeting, and the consensus was that it should only be required for non-residential uses and mixed uses to establish street trees. So that was a pretty easy change. We just went ahead and updated the provision to specifically state that that only non-residential or mixed uses need to establish street trees. Discussion item number 10. So this was talking about the potential of updating the species list. So the existing language regarding species list seems to be pretty relevant to what we've been talking about, although there were some comments about potentially updating it. I did have a chance to talk to Tyler Schultz with Telluride Arborist. It sounds like he had worked with the town before. So, and he had mentioned that there was a list that was developed. He thought he wasn't heavily involved in, but he believes there was a list a few years ago with Jen Coates and the town board at that time. And I've followed up a couple times and I haven't heard back. I know he's really busy right now in the season. But that may be a list we want to reference at some point and see if that's applicable to the changes we want to see here. But again, I think there weren't major comments about updating the species list. Again, it's just more double checking and referencing and making sure they're consistent. And then the last discussion item is number 11, which is the lot scenarios. So I'm going to go ahead and go through each of these, and you should each have a copy of these in your staff report. There are 5 different scenarios, and I'm going to go ahead and start off with scenarios 1A and 1B, and you may want to just have both for reference out to compare. The reason they're 1A and 1B is that we're using the same lot for these scenarios. And then you can see in that chart there, we break out what the provisions are for landscaping standards. And 1A describes what the existing regulations are for this lot. And then 1B goes into what the proposed regulations would be. So getting into scenario 1A, this is a 6,500 square foot corner lot. The zoning designation is R. And if you take a look at the category and code requirement and calculation, that chart there, you can see that the existing regulations require a minimum number of trees, which is 1 per 2,000 square feet of gross lot area. So in this case, with this being a 6,500 square foot lot, they would be required to have 4 trees. And then in addition to that, there are minimum number of trees required for the front yard and for the side yard. For the front yard, it's 1 for each 25 feet of front street. So in this case, they would be required 2 front yard trees. And then in the side yard, they're required 1 for each 50 feet of side street. So in this case, with it being 130 feet long, they would be required to have 3 street side yard trees. And then the shrubs, they're required 1 for each 10 feet of front street. So in this case, they would be required to have 5 shrubs in the front yard. And then on the street side yard, it's 1 for each 50 feet of street side, which requires 3 shrubs. So then going into the ground cover, which is that hatched area, you can see the minimum front yard ground cover. It currently requires 50% of what that front yard area is. And I updated it, I don't think it's in the staff report, but that front yard area has a 25 foot front yard setback. So calculating that to the width of the lot, that would be a 1,250 square foot front yard area. So 50% of that means it would be 625 square feet would be required for the front yard ground cover. And then for the side yard street, it's also 50% requirement. So with an 8-foot side yard setback and 130 feet long, that side yard area would calculate at 1,040 square feet, which requires 520 square feet of side yard ground cover. And then the maximum, there is a provision there currently about the maximum rock cover, and that's that rock symbology you see there. So there's a maximum front yard stone and rock cover requirement of 10%. And then the side yard is 10% as well. So you can see in the depiction there that it's showing both the minimum ground cover requirement, the maximum rock cover, and then that white area is just the not part of the minimum required area, but they are currently in the code required to treat the rest of the, they're supposed to have ground cover. So that would be covered with live ground cover.
So those trees on Laura Street they're a little tight there. Like you see around town when people plant these little trees next to their house and then the little tree grows and then they have to cut the little tree down because it's damaging the house.
Yeah, you could just move those.
Yeah.
Yeah, just move them so that they're not encroaching on the house, sort of in between the two structures, or closer to the front yard or something like that. But Michelle's point is a good one. If we're going to publish something like this, we probably shouldn't have trees, within 2 feet of the foundation.
Yeah, and maybe I should have started out by saying these are just for discussion. These aren't intended to be in the code, but definitely if that's something we want to do, we would update it to be that more appropriate. But again, these are just really for discussion, so you can kind of see how the regulations play out in real time.
Well, and on that note, I don't know that we are going to go that far, but it almost seems like you should spell out for people, like even 2 feet is too close. A tree, to plant a tree to a house. And, I like, it's not our job to police everything, but I see this all over town and I'm like, who the hell thought that that was a good idea?
Well, especially when a house changes hands, that's when they do an inspection, that guy will list all the trees that are too close to the foundation.
Right.
Right? And then the trees that are near a power line, those get cut completely on that side. So then there's these like goofy ass lopsided trees. I don't think we're going to solve all the tree problems. I just had to point that out because I notice it all the time and I'm like, oh my God, complete lack of forethought.
This is part of our education effort, I think, is to just teach people that you gotta account for the mature size of the tree. Sure.
So if you take a look at scenario 1B, that is comparing the same lot for what the proposed regulations would be. You can see in the methodology there of the code requirements, we're showing, just as we discussed earlier, that the max lot coverage for this type of lot, our zoning designation is 50%. And our methodology for calculating the landscaped area is to use the inverse of what that maximum lot coverage is. So in this case, with it being zoned R, the maximum lot coverage is 50%. So the inverse of that would be 50% as required for the minimum landscaped area. That calculates to 30,250 square feet being covered. And that's that gray shaded area. So 50% of the lot is minimum, needs to be landscaped area. And then in turn, the minimum live ground cover is 20% of that landscaped area. So that calculates to 650 square feet. And that minimum live ground cover is that plus sign symbology. And then the non-live ground cover is 30% of the landscaped area, calculated at 975 square feet. That's the hatched area, so 30% of that gray area. And then the minimum number of trees and shrubs. So for trees, it's 1 required per 3,000 square feet of landscaped area. So in this case, they would be required to have 2 trees. And then shrubs, they would be required to have 4 shrubs. Now, there is a couple different provisions in here to think about as well, is that there's a provision about the front yard. There has to be a minimum of 25% of the landscaped area is within the front yard. So that's why you're seeing a bulk of it up there. And then I think there was a street tree requirement. sorry, I lost my train of thought. So yeah, that's how that plays out with the proposed regulations, showing the landscaped area, the minimum number of trees and minimum number of shrubs. And again, this is a corner lot. So, and then the blank space, just like the existing, that's just showing the lot coverage minus minimum landscaped area. But again, there's the provision, sorry, that's what I was getting at earlier, is that all areas on the lot must be treated. So even though it looks like it's blank here, just know that because of the provision of all areas must be treated, that would be treated with landscape. So. Any general questions to go over and how this applies to this specific lot before I get into the other lots?
Well, I gotta say, it makes me think, even though I'm generally in favor of reducing the number of trees and shrubs required, we still need to balance it with the desire to have a decent tree inventory that provides shade. And I mean, it's that balance between water use and the effect of having a good tree inventory. I'm wondering if we want to split the difference between the original regs as they are now and what the proposed regs require. It just, I mean, if we're looking at these scenarios and trying to say, does this really work? It just seems pretty minimal to me in this case. But if nobody else agrees.
The tree thing, just to clarify, so we were requiring 5 trees for this lot and now it's reduced to 2. Is that, am I seeing that correctly?
That's what it looks like.
Yeah, and it's a little convoluted in what the existing regulations are, because you see there are 5 trees. Technically, they're required 1 per 2,000 square feet of gross lot area, so 4 are required currently, but there's the additional provisions in there that requires the minimum number of trees in the front yard and in the side yard, which that in turn equals 5 trees on the lot total.
Gotcha.
Only on a corner lot, however, correct?
Right.
Yeah, on the street side yard for corner lots, correct.
I think there might be a happy medium on the trees. The shrubs, the reduction of shrubs doesn't really concern me so much because I don't know that they add so much, but the trees
Do
add a lot.
Yeah. I'll agree with John just because I was good with 2,000, but hearing from the town, that's too much. So I'm willing to go in the middle.
So if we changed it to 2,000 instead of the 3,000, then we're just looking at, sorry. So that would be 2 trees required for this lot as well.
No, if we went to 2, it'd be 3 trees.
Yeah,
2,000 square feet would be 3.
6,000.
Well, so it's using the, what's the tree requirement is per the landscaped area, the minimum landscaped area. So with that being 3,250.
Gotcha.
Yeah, okay. Good.
Maybe the town should just give away free trees and then people will want to plant lots of trees.
One thing I'll just point out in that methodology that essentially for the trees and shrubs, we've shaved it down in 2 parts because we're only taking the gray area that's shown on these scenarios is the base for calculating the landscaping requirements, right? So really we've already negated half of the property. So in essence, if we kept it where it was or increased it number per square footage, it'll be equal to what was done before, but we're already reducing the base, if you will, too. So again, it's a whole system that's shifting a little bit.
Should the tree requirement be based on the whole lot size, or does that just open up another can of worms?
I would say that opens a whole can of worms that we don't really want to get into. I think if we wanted to go to like, 1,500 square feet, that would probably be even better. And then mind you too, I don't want to put more on Preston or staff, but we're going to be reviewing these anyway, that there's an administrative component to deviate from that. There's also the formal review of deviation from the number of trees. Because the number of trees or shrubs is a number, there can be a variance request for it. So I guess what I would say is if you want more, let's err on that side for the time being. And if we need to ratchet it down later on, it can be.
I think I'd be okay with that.
I would be okay with that.
Mhm. Yep.
Because what we require is always going to be the minimum. It's not like Preston's going to come in and say, actually, I think this lot would look better with more trees than it says in the code.
Okay, so yeah, we'll go ahead and update that table, and it's just adjusting the tree requirement. And then we can dive into scenarios 2, 3, and 4. It sounds like everybody is on the same page in terms of the methodology we're using, so I won't get too far into that. But you can see in scenario.
Can I interrupt just for a second? Sorry, Katie.
Yeah.
Scenario 2, I'm curious why you made it a lot of 10,650 square feet. That's huge for HR, actually.
Yeah, I think that was actually, somebody had mentioned something about wanting to see a 10,000 square foot lot, so a little bit bigger of a lot. And these were pulled from GIS being real lots.
Okay.
I can't remember exactly which address this was. I could probably find it, but.
No worries. I just, most of the lot, I mean, this is what I would call an R lot, not an HR lot.
Yeah.
And I get it. So that's okay. Maybe just in terms of if these scenarios are going to be part of the record going forward, you might just call this an R zoning designation instead of an HR.
Okay.
Just because most HR, like historically, they were 2 town 25-foot by 143.5 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like 7,100 square feet or something like that. And so that would be average. And now with the changes we've made to the code in the HR, it's actually half that. So, but these are all on the ground lots, so I get it.
Yeah.
Just a point.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, so I won't dive too deep into that one because that's pretty similar to that R lot that we got into. But scenario number 3 is a little different because this is showing a lot that's zoned GC, general commercial. And the difference in this you can see is obviously the maximum lot coverage is different. So in turn, the minimum landscaped area requirement is different at 30%. So, substantially lower. The minimum live ground cover is 10%. The non-live ground cover is 20%. And then the number of trees, that will be increased, but right now they're only required 1, although you're seeing on the lot there are 4. And the reason for that is because there's a provision in the updates that says that parking lot landscape island trees are required to have 2 trees per island. So in this case, you'd be adding 2 trees to that island space there on the corners. So it'd be 4 trees total. And then, yeah, the minimum number of shrubs is shown there at just being 2 is required. But again, it sounds like the consensus is we want to increase the minimum number of trees. So I could see this being increased to like 2,000 potentially. And then lastly is scenario number 4. So this is, again, a zoned R lot, but this is substantially larger lot. This is over 1 acre. And if you'll remember, there's a provision in the footnote under the table that says that anything over 1 acre needs to meet the provisions of a 1 acre lot. So we're not requiring, an exponentially larger number of landscaped area if it's over an acre. So you can see the calculation there is taking 50% of what would be a 1 acre lot. So their landscaped area, required area is 21,780 square feet. And then for this lot, they would be required to have 8 trees and 16 shrubs. So it looks substantially, more trees and shrubs on this lot, with it just being a larger lot. So any questions, concerns, comments about anything else on these lots that's needs to be updated? I've definitely heard the trees requirement.
So you talked about changing tree requirement for commercial as well. Given that, would this scenario 3, would that change?
Yeah,
Yes.
so
It's pretty sufficient.
yeah, so with scenario number 3 being the GC, the general commercial lot.
Yes.
Yeah, I think what we had, the interpretation I was hearing, or the consensus, was that we would increase the minimum number of trees required for all lots, residential and non-residential and mixed use. So that could be something that gets increased to, instead of 1 per 3,000, maybe it's 1 per 2,000 or even higher. Let me do the calculation real quick. So
Yeah, and while you're calculating that, Katie, just real quick, that again, that's establishing the minimum. And so if the other provisions, like in this case, the where did it go? Parking island, 2 trees per island would require 4. And so if I think what you're going to find is the calculation of minimum trees is 4 and the parking island trees are 4. So it really doesn't change the total number of trees needed in this particular case, because again, as Katie mentioned, we need to look at all of the provisions and meet that minimum. I don't know if that answers the question. It wouldn't require any more, essentially, even if we increased it.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out what the effect on this one would be, changing that. It sounds like it's still the same, so sufficient. Yeah, good.
all right. If there are no other comments, questions, concerns about these, we can go ahead and move on to the last few discussion topics. I just had some questions posed for you all to consider in case we wanted to have more discussion. So you can see I think I've included it in the staff report. There's a list of items that we included or questions we had for you all. So the first question was, what does flexibility mean to you, and what do you see in the current table that's not flexible? And we've gotten some really good feedback tonight. I think we understand what flexibility means, but if anyone wants to elaborate on that or just add any other comments or concerns, feel free. Okay, I'll go ahead and move on to, let's see, I think we've covered number 2. Number 3, the sense that I'm getting is that this is achieving the goal of being more water conscientious.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, and then just one last thing to clarify on number 5, I think there was a comment that I received about the 1 acre lot limit. Does that seem appropriate, or is that something that I just want to make sure that we're not misinterpreting that or need some clarification on that? But does that seem appropriate, or do we need to maybe decrease it to be a 1/2 acre lot limit?
I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Well, moving forward, what have we got?
Well, how about what your thoughts were on coming up with what you came up with, Katie? Do you think it needs to change?
And Vista Terrace, how many we got up there?
I think that's something that's pretty standard across the board. And I think a 1 acre lot limit is pretty good. It's just an easy number to calculate. I think it makes sense. If you look at that scenario, number 4, I think it makes sense there. So I think it's appropriate, but I just want to make sure that there's no.
Yeah, Doug's pointing out that there really just aren't a lot of large lots in Ridgway.
Nor should there be.
Well, and the other component of that large lot element is that you would anticipate that a lot of the lot is not being disturbed through construction, which I think is more generally agreed upon as native, that's not disturbed through construction, than on smaller lots. So it gets into the existing landscaping components as well.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, great. Well, not hearing any other comments, concerns, or anything. That's all I have for you. So thanks for bearing with us, and thanks again for all the feedback. That's been really helpful. So I think the next steps for us are to make a few tweaks to the updates based on our discussion. And then I think what we'll do, TJ, if you want to clarify anything, I think it'll be at the next planning commission, unless TJ thinks otherwise, but.
Well, it's not necessarily me. I would pose it on to you guys, the planning commission, if I think we're getting really close.
Yeah.
If you think that it's tangible enough to make an approval or a recommendation with a condition, we can do that. If you would rather us bring it back to you guys, we can certainly do that. So I think what I've got out of this evening, I'm comfortable either way. I don't want to just keep, rehashing the stuff, but if there are things that we need to discuss through more here, then let's certainly do that.
How many changes do you think there are?
I've noted like 6 or 7, but I think they're pretty straightforward, so they should be pretty easy updates.
What do you think, John?
I don't know, I probably could be comfortable with recommending forwarding to council with the updates that we discussed tonight, unless anybody has
I think that's reasonable.
more changes they want to throw out. I mean, we could beat this horse for months.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd like to see it go out sooner than later since enforcement.
Well, so with that train of thought, maybe I'll throw out my notes and just kind of rehash it, make it on the record, and see where you guys are at with this. Because it sounds like really the only big concerns are, again, keeping to the discussion items that Katie laid out in the memo. So it looks like discussion item number 2, where we'll make the change to option 2, which identifies project types that would apply, that these regulations would apply to, with the caveat that we would basically combine items C and D, that would be the new landscape projects and the rehab projects, and change both of those to a percentage, and that percentage would be 25%. We would address item number 3 by removing the quote, or remain native element of that addition. Number 6, number 8, we talked about the high water turf and high use areas and what we're going to do there. I guess that's kind of the most subjective component. What Katie and I can do and our team can do is look back and come up with a plan that says, okay, we've heard it, we understand the concern, here's how we think. So that's one element that maybe we would rely on the town council to evaluate a little bit more if it were to go forward that way. But again, I think we understand the concern there. And
So are we eliminating the Kentucky bluegrass from the verbiage completely in both places?
Yep, and even the prairie grass. So we wouldn't have any of the quote unquote such as components in the language itself. All of the types and species would be in that species section.
Okay.
Then we would change the minimum number of trees from 1 per 3,000 square feet to 1 per 2,000 square feet. I think that was it.
It's not too bad.
Yeah. I guess with the caveat of if we do that and as you know, Katie dives in and makes these final changes, if we think there's something substantive that's, you know, getting impacted by these changes, which I don't necessarily see, but you never know the ripple effect through codes, we would suggest bringing it back. But again, in the effort of time and getting this thing through with making sure we're being comprehensive, I think it's at a pretty decent point to do that if the commission is comfortable with that.
Seems like it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that would require a
A motion.
Motion.
Motion, yeah.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to recommend approval of the landscaping regulation updated or updates that TJ just mentioned. And to present this to town council at the next meeting.
I'll second.
Have a motion, we have a second. Further discussion?
Thanks, for your work
Kristen?
on this.
Commissioner Emelson,
Aye.
Commissioner List,
Aye.
Commissioner Montague,
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Meyer,
Aye.
Mayor Clark,
Aye.
Chairperson Cameron.
Aye. Final item. Minutes from the meeting of May 25th, 2021. Anybody have any issues?
I missed that one. I didn't hear what you said.
Here are the minutes.
Minutes.
Oh,
I see no issues and I.
I'll second that. I have a motion, I have a second.
Aye.
Commissioner Emelson,
Aye.
Commissioner List,
Aye.
Commissioner Montague,
aye.
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Meyer,
Aye.
Mayor Clark,
Aye.
Chairperson Cameron.
Aye. Motion to adjourn.
Well done. So moved.
Aye.
Nice. Feels like an accomplishment. It just as the rain picks up too. It's perfect. Same way we came in.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, TJ. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah,
Great
thank
job.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
So we're back again in 2 weeks.
Pretty soon, yeah.
And you said it was only gonna be on Zoom too.
It'll be the same format. So
Okay.
if you can't, at least, I mean. we can-
Yeah, I
we can
might
decide.
someplace else, so I might have to go.
Okay.
Have to drive back here.
We'll definitely have the Zoom capability.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
It's pretty busy.
How nice to be back.
Yes,
It
it's
is.
very nice.
Maybe we should put cardboard people in the chair.